Imagine you're Konami in 2004. You are riding high on the success of Metal Gear Solid 2, Silent Hill 2, PES, and more. But you see your competitors on the other side of the world making it big with their licensed movie games. EA is doing James Bond and Harry Potter. Activision has Shrek and Spider-Man. Even THQ is making a good bang with their Pixar titles. You want in on it. But every upcoming big movie property is taken. What do? Maybe you license Hellboy or Dawn of the Dead, but nah, you want something bigger. You want that Lord of the Rings money. Troy has Brad Pitt and big battles in it, but Warner is not licensing that for some reason. There's got to be something. Jersey Girl, Fahrenheit 9/11. You start to doubt yourself, but then you take a second look at Disney's upcoming movies. Bingo. As weird as this mashup of publisher and IP might seem, in hindsight, King Arthur was an obvious choice for a video game adaptation. It was a big-budget swords and sandals action movie in the vein of Gladiator, and it stars Clive Owen, who at the time was favored to become the next James Bond in the post-Brosnan era, and Keira Knightley, fresh out of the success of Pirates of the Caribbean. There are no shortage of big-screen adaptations of the Arthurian legend. Where this one tried to set itself apart was in trying to be a grounded, quote-unquote, historically accurate portrayal. So, no Camelot.
It's only a model. Shh.
No Holy Grail. No Sword in the Stone. Nothing that would give it anything resembling a fantasy flair. A baffling decision in the wake of the unprecedented success of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Harry Potter franchise. The result was that this didn't do much to encourage audiences, so it just came and went with little fanfare. Having just seen it recently, I can tell why it failed to leave any mark. It's competently made and well acted, but it's betrayed by a cliched script and a story that doesn't fully utilize the strengths of the source material in any advantageous way. Despite a few decent action sequences, it's, simply put, boring. But where the movie finds its source of inspiration in Gladiator, the game is a straight-up ripoff of EA's Lord of the Rings games, which is glaringly obvious from looking at them side by side. They're both hack-and-slash action games with a fixed camera, feature a selection of characters from the movie in faithfully recreated versions of epic battle scenes, and they are overall very similar, down to the presentation. But where the Rings games went on to become some of the most successful licensed games of all time, garnering excellent sales and reviews, King Arthur feels like their half-baked little sibling. King Arthur was developed by Crumb Studios, an Australian developer better known for the cult favorite series of platformers Tide the Tasmanian Tiger. But they're more infamous in my mind for making that dreadful Spyro reboot trilogy in the mid-2000s. In a similar fashion to EA, they had unprecedented access to the movie's production, which allowed them to faithfully recreate plot, settings, and cast of characters. At the start of every level, you have to choose between 2 of the 5 or 6 characters selectable in the main campaign, each belonging to one of 3 types. Some excel at sword fighting, while others are better at range attacks. You know, the usual. Despite these superficial differences, the reality is that I never felt like choosing one over another affected the outcome in the slightest, as they all play exactly the same and can get you out of a pinch if necessary. Compare these to The Return of the King, or something like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, where character choice is consequential, as the different strengths and weaknesses can definitely affect your success in any given mission, while selecting a character in King Arthur comes down to aesthetic preference. Okay, I've compared this enough to the Lord of the Rings games, but in its defense, this game has one thing that the Lord of the Rings doesn't: horses. That's right, horseback gameplay is one of the big selling points I remember from this game's marketing. They even give it a special feature on the back of the box, throwing the word innovative around, so you know they mean business. But is it really innovative? Well, no. What the horseback levels add is a clunkier and more unresponsive feeling to the gameplay. In these sections, controls are embedded, and the horses are much slower than simply walking. The linear layout of the levels doesn't change, neither does the static camera, which means you're stuck playing the same game in a much worse fashion. The combination of all of this results in the absolute worst missions this game has to offer. It's disappointing, but ultimately the most quote-unquote original combat type this game brings to the table turns out to be its absolute worst. The on-foot missions are comparatively better, and yet repetitiveness sets in all too quickly. Waves and waves of enemies, each and every one of whom need to be killed in order to access the next area, populate every mission. And considering that there's little strategy other than button mash your way through each one, it becomes mind-numbing much too quickly. There is a bare-bones upgrade system with a handful of skills that can be improved and melee combos to be acquired, but they are rarely needed. That's also in part due to some of the combos being frustratingly hard to perform, as the first couple of hits push the enemy out of range, so the last few don't connect at all. It happens enough times where I figured it's just not worth memorizing all those button combinations to get the same result I would get from button mashing. For the one fan of the movie out there, the game does a great job at retelling the story. Every major scene is represented here as linear levels filled with enemies pulled from the different enemy factions of the movie. The one highlight being the Saxon attack on the Britons in the Frozen Lake, which the game translates as a long-range focus mission, where the objective is to slow down the barrage of enemies by attacking their flanks with arrows, while also dealing with closer enemies in the foreground. It is by far the most interesting sequence in the game, but hardly anything too exciting. The Battle of Pelennor feels this is not. Later in the adventures, some of the levels get harder and require more patience, and with the lack of checkpoints it can become quite annoying. Thankfully, the range attacks, even with no upgrades, tend to be quite overpowered, so by strategically positioning myself and letting it rain arrows, I was able to make easy work of some of these more annoying levels. It doesn't work on every single one, but it can certainly lessen the frustration in some parts. Reviews at the time seemed to give the game some praise for its graphics and audio. Now, I'm no expert by any means, but I must say that I found both quite ugly. The graphics are drab, and for my liking elements don't mesh well with one another, by which I mean that things like fire and water seem superimposed on the background, instead of feeling like a natural part of them. Despite these deficiencies, graphics are passable enough where they don't detract from the experience. The big issue in presentation I found hard to overcome was the audio. All of the movie's cast comes back for the game, but either they weren't fully engaged or they're betrayed by a bad script because every line reading is beyond bad, especially those that repeat constantly. At one point I honestly thought I was listening to a Richard Ayoade impersonator instead of the actual actor from the movie.
Did you hear that?
I think we're getting closer.
Yes, but closer to what?
And that is disappointing, because otherwise presentation is aiming for something immersive. Not only are the locations faithfully recreated from the movie sets, but it does try to be immersive by doing seamless transitioning from movie clips to CGI to in-engine cutscenes and finally to gameplay, which works fairly well most of the time.
Cease these aggressions or forfeit your lives.
Save the villagers.
Thankfully, King Arthur is a fairly quick affair to get through, and having mini documentaries that go in depth into the making of the game, unlocking after every few levels, kept me motivated. For someone who loves behind the scenes stuff like myself, it's at least a worthy reward for pushing through the levels. Then there's an unlockable battle arena, which unlocks a wider array of characters from the movie, including the rest of the Knights of the Round Table and even some enemies for a team battle arena where you play essentially the same way as you do the campaign. It is a decent distraction for what it is, but honestly I only played a couple of matches. It's not too engaging, and I can't really think that anyone would come back exclusively for this after finishing the main game. King Arthur is not a terrible game, but it is an unambitious one. Despite what the back of the box might have you believe, it doesn't really bring anything new to the genre. And it's not as successful as the Lord of the Rings games it's so obviously trying to ape. Back then, it would have been a fun Sunday afternoon game. Today, it's hard to find excuses to play other than for making videos like this. In the end, Crumb Studios tried to stay so faithful to the movie that it ended up replicating its utter mediocrity. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching through the end. If you did, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications, comment, all of that would help. So thank you so much again, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.